Welcome to Outsystems. Today I'm going to show you how to build an expense dashboard in Outsystems Developer Cloud in about 20 minutes. Let's get started. First, I'll open ODC Studio and click the Create icon at the top of the screen. This will display a dialog box with options for building a web app, tablet app, or a phone app. In our example, I'll select Web App, and in the Details screen, we can enter a name and a description for the application. We can also choose a base color for the app's UI theme, or we can upload an icon image, and as you'll see, the color of the icon will become the theme color of the application. Once the app is created, we'll need to create some screens. There are multiple ways to add a screen, including by dragging a screen element in the toolbar on the left onto the blank canvas, or by selecting one of the many templates available. One of my favorite ways to create screens, however, is to import data entities from an Excel spreadsheet. To do this, I'll simply select the Data tab on the right, then right-click on the database item in the object tree below the tabs on top. Next, I'll select my spreadsheet from my file system, and the spreadsheet has two tabs, one for a card entity and one for an expense entity. ODC Studio will ask you to confirm that you want to import these entities, and when you click the Import button, you'll see some stars flashing in the context menu on the right, indicating that the platform is creating objects as it imports your data. Once the entities have been imported from the spreadsheet, you'll see that the Data tab now includes the two entities you just imported. From here, you can easily create screens for the data by dragging and dropping those entities directly onto the main flow canvas. Some more stars will flash, and now you'll see that you have 4 screens, 2 list screens to display your entities, and 2 detail screens to allow you to view and edit an individual record. You'll also see that the screens have an aggregate to retrieve the data you need, and you'll also get the CRUD operations that you need to manage the database. Now I'm going to open the card detail screen and make a few changes to improve the application. I'm going to delete the image placeholder on the right-hand side and then drop in an if condition in the container that held that image. First, I'll open the expression editor and select a built-in function to make the data all lowercase for the evaluation of this conditional. Then I'm going to drill down into the card entity and select the current record's card type. And finally, I'll enter the word Visa in the conditional in lowercase. The idea here being that in our database we have Visa and MasterCard available as card types, and the condition will allow the UI to display the correct image for the card type that's currently selected. Now I can drag an image placeholder into the true section and the false sections of the if statement. Then I can choose the images to display. I have a couple of PNG files for the card images, and I'll add the Visa image to the true section and the MasterCard image to the false section. In addition to the details of the card itself, I'm going to want to display some of the transactions that have been run on the selected credit card, so I'll start by placing a separator widget below the card details screen. As you can see, it can sometimes be a little challenging to find the exact spot on which to drop a widget on the screen, so I can switch to the widget tree view to get more granular control of how I'm going to add this new element to my screen. By collapsing the columns 2 widget on the screen, on the tree, I can selectively place the new widget directly under the columns more easily. I'll do the same for an object container that I want to drop in place to contain the expenses table that I'm going to want to add to the screen. To add the expenses table, all I have to do is to switch back to the database tab and then drag and drop the expense entity right into the container that I just added to the screen. Outsystems has built-in accelerators like this into all aspects of ODC Studio to make your life as a developer much easier. I'm going to make some changes to the table and the aggregate that was created to fetch the data, beginning with setting the max records properties to 10. Then I'm going to switch back over to the Data tab to ensure that the table will be sorted in descending order so that the highest expenses appear at the top of that list. Since we're only going to fetch 10 records, I can also delete the automatically generated pagination that was created when I dropped the entity into the container on my screen. Just above the canvas, you can see that there are a number of tools available to help you build your user interfaces. I'm going to use one of those to delete the image URL column, and then I'll edit the styles of the columns so that they fit in the space in relatively equal size. First, I'll set the company column to fill about 40% of the available space, and then the date and time columns to 30% each. Although I deleted the image URL column earlier, I still want to display a small icon of the company's logo, so I can drop an image into the company column just to the left of the company name. I'll resize this image to be a bit more appropriate for the size of the display in our list table. Similar to what I did on the main screen, now I need to choose an image, but rather than selecting a local image from my computer, I'm going to use an external URL because I know that my data includes URLs to each company's logo. When I need to choose the URL, you'll see that ODC Studio will make some suggestions based on the context you're working in. Since the IDE knows we've used an aggregate to populate our screen, it will display some of the values returned from our database, including the image URL, which I can click to select. I want to make a couple of additional small changes to the way our UI will work for our users, including screen transitions. I'll need to select the back button and assign a transition effect from the properties, and then I can also assign that to the URL itself. ODC also allows you to take advantage of full role-based access control, so you can prevent unauthorized access to your applications. In this case, I'm going to change the accessibility from authenticated user to everyone. Now, once I've confirmed everything, I can go ahead and open my app in the browser and explore progress of the application. You can see the card and expense screens at the top menu, and when we explore, we can see the transitions that we set up previously. Okay, so now that we've built a few screens, let's complete the application by creating the dashboard. This time, I'll right-click on the main flow section of the Interface tab and click on Add Screen. Outsystems provides a number of pre-designed screen templates out of the box, and you can customize and make your own templates as well. For our demo, I'm just going to create a blank screen and name it My Dashboard, setting the accessibility to everyone. To build out my screen, I'm going to use design widgets that will provide some structure to the display. First, I'll add a card sectioned widget, which, as you can see here, has 4 sections that you can use to design the screen as you like. I'll add a title to this widget, and then I'll continue adding sections for the other parts of the dashboard. First, I'm going to add a container below my card sectioned widget, and then I'll add some padding to the top of that container to separate it from the widget above. Next, I will be able to drop a 2-column container widget, and within each section, I'll add card sectioned widgets as above to display the different information. I'll add titles to these sections as well, one of them to display the top 5 companies in my expense database, and one to display stock history from which we will get from an API call. Now, to start filling out the UI, first I'll need to right-click the dashboard in the Elements tree to the right and choose Fetch Data from Database. This will create an aggregate for me that I can design in such a way that will provide our dashboard with the appropriate data to display. For this section of our dashboard, I'm going to edit the aggregate to create a join between the expense table and the card table. The query designer is easy and intuitive to use. And if you wanted to, you could even enter a query using natural language by answering the question at the top of the editor about what data you'd like to retrieve. I want to set the condition of my join to ensure that expenses are associated with the specific card that was used to purchase those items. In this query editor, I can sort data, sum data, group by and remove data, and perform other tasks that make generating the query to produce the right results very easily without having to know any SQL at all. You can also see that the editor provides you with a real-time view of the data you're retrieving, so you can verify your query in place before using it to populate your screens. Once we go back to our dashboard screen, you'll see that the aggregate was automatically renamed from aggregate 1 to get expenses. The built-in code mentor is working with you continuously as you build your application out in ODC Studio. Once I've finished setting up my aggregate, I'm going to want to display this data on the screen and the dashboard. So I'm going to drag and drop a column chart into the content placeholder at the top section. I'll need to select the list returned from our Get Expenses aggregate, and I'll need to map the contents of that result to the data point type that the chart requires. Once I've mapped the data, I can add a tooltip that will appear when you hover over a specific column. And I can select the stacking type and other settings of the chart. If needed, I can also set a max records value for our aggregate. Now that I've set up our first section, I'm going to need to fill in the details for the top 5 companies section. To begin with, I'll have to fetch some data from the database again and fill out the details of the aggregate that will return our query results. For the expense list, I'm not going to need a join, but I will do some sorting and summing of the data in order to find the top 5 companies by expense. Since the IDE renamed this aggregate to Get Expenses 2, I'll need to change the name to be more descriptive, so I'll call it Get Top 5 Companies. I'll also set the max records to 5, and then I'll drag the aggregate into the content section of the widget on the dashboard screen. When I drag the entity into my content section, you'll notice that I have a number of columns. Again, I'm going to remove the URL column, and then I'll use the controls at the top to switch the order of the company and amount columns so that the company is on the left. I'll also set the columns each to be about 50% of available space using the style editor. Similarly to what we did on the card detail screen, I'll also add an image to the company column to display the logo. And finally, to fill out this application, I'm going to want to call an API to get stock market data for the section in the lower right of the screen. To use an API, I need to click on the Logic tab, then select Consume REST API. We can expose APIs from our ODC applications as well. And after I choose to consume an API, I'll have the option to consume either a single or multiple method API from which I could use a Swagger file if I had one available. I'm going to consume a single API from stockdata.org to retrieve the price history for Apple stock. When consuming an API, I can parameterize the UL by surrounding the appropriate values such as the stock ticker symbol in brackets. However, for this demo, I'm just going to hard code these values for simplicity. We can also set up authentication, and we can add any required headers for our API call here as well. When I click the test button, I can normalize the response and turn it into what looks just like an Outsystems action, so that ODC Studio normalizes your application APIs so that you can work with them by dragging them, dropping them into your action flows like any other Outsystems action. Now, to use this in my application, I'm going to want to copy the response structure so I can paste it into the data action I'll need to create to consume the API. I can create the data action by right-clicking my screen and then selecting Fetch Data from Other Sources, and that'll create a data action that I rename to Get Stock History. Going back to the Logic tab, now I can just drag my API definition directly into the data action I just created for the dashboard screen. You'll notice that the data action has a default output parameter called out1, which I'll delete and then replace by pasting the response structure I copied from the API definition. To use the data, I just need to add an assign element to my action flow so I can assign the results from the API call to the output parameter structures from our Get Stock History data action. Now, going back to my screen, I can drag a line chart to the contents section of our stock history section and complete the required parameters to populate the graph. I'll add the data structure as the source for the graph, and then I'll complete the mapping to the data point list similarly to what I did on the previous chart earlier. I'll use the closing stock price as the value for the graph, and then I'll customize the label to include the date for that specific price point. You can see here that by using built-in functions, I can actually format the date to the way I want it to appear on my application display. There are hundreds of built-in functions that Outsystems provides to make your job as a developer easier. I'm going to add the date as the series name for the chart, and then I'm going to make a couple of changes to the x-axis in order to display the labels in a diagonal manner to make them more easily viewable for the user. I'm going to set this at 70%, and then I'll go back to the screen and mark the dashboard as our default entry point for the application. And then last but not least, I want to add the dashboard screen to the top menu so that we can go back to it at any point. I need to go into the screen block, and I'll use my widget tree again to move that link to the beginning of that list. So you can see now that my dashboard is before cards and expenses. And now that our one-click publish button is green and we've completed these changes, I can go ahead and publish this and see how it looks. When I click open in browser, we can see that our dashboard looks great. I'm getting all my data and displaying it in my tables and charts. But personally, I'm a fan of dark mode displays. So before we wrap up this demo, I'm going to change the UI a little bit. Jumping back into ODC Studio, I can click on the Theme Editor tool above the canvas to change some UI elements. You can see that this editor gives you a number of options to alter your user interfaces, and I'm going to change the screen background to black. Here we can also change font sizes, element colors and shapes, as well as adding background images to your screens if you prefer. However, if I really want to spice up my UI, I can go directly into the Style Sheet editor and drop some CSS right in there to get even more control over the display. I'm dropping about 70 lines of CSS here, and then I'm going to publish the application again. When the app's published, I can switch back over to the app, which I still have running in my browser, and just hit the refresh button to update the dashboard. Now our dark mode is fully on display, and as I move my cursor around the screen, you can see that hovering over a column or a line in a chart can be interactive. And if you want to take this to the next level, you can add actions so that clicking on a bar or a data point will open a drill down screen or another page. And that's it. We're finished. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you're interested in learning more about Outsystems, be sure to visit us at www.outsystems.com.